Hello, everybody. Welcome in. Just letting folks in. Okay. So thanks so much for joining. A few quick access notes. We have an ASL interpreter. Um, you can spotlight the interpreter if helpful. We also have captioning. If you click on captions, the CC button at the bottom, and hit show captions, you should be able to access those. If you are not speaking, if folks could turn off their videos just for access, that would be fantastic. Um, and then if folks who are speaking can just make sure to say their name before they speak and to speak as clearly and slowly as possible for the interpreters and captioner, that would be awesome. Um, so my name is Marissa Ditkowski. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white woman with dark hair pulled back and glasses. I'm the executive director of the National Disabled Legal Professionals Association. We're so glad that everybody could join us tonight for this awesome panel. We have so many stars on this panel focused on navigating legal academia with a disability as a part of our career exploration series. I'm sure y'all have seen. If you are not already an NDLPA member, we hope that you consider joining us. But in the meantime, I will kick it over to my esteemed colleague AJ, who will be moderating this evening's panel. Take it away, AJ.
Hey y'all, my name is AJ Link. I am the president of the board of directors of the National Disabled Legal Professionals Association. I'm not an esteemed colleague. I am a black dude with a beard and a green shirt and a green hat, and I'm joined by a bunch of amazing individuals. It's always cool to do these things and be the least qualified person on the group. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining. What I will do is I will let folks give background when you answer the first question, which allows you to do that. So the first question is, can you tell us about yourself, your career, and how you got to where you are today? And the first person on my screen is Brittany.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany Wilson. I'm an associate professor of law and the director of the Civil Rights and Disability Justice Clinic at New York Law School. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a Black woman with glasses. My hair right now is pushed up in a bun and I have a headband around it. And I'm a little sick, so if I sound weird, I apologize in advance. Um, how did I get to where I am? Woo, career journey. So I am a civil rights attorney. I feel like that is the identity that I most subscribe to. I went to law school motivated by being a Black disabled woman from Brownsville, Brooklyn, wanted to grow up to represent the demographics that I encompass. Black disabled woman, wanted to advocate for people like me, wouldn't be here if I didn't have people who advocated for me. And so I went to law school to be a civil rights attorney. And I was blessed to be able to do that. After law school, I worked at the National Office of the ACLU. I was a fellow in their racial justice program. And then after that, I did another legal fellowship at the Center for Constitutional Rights, where in both of those fellowships I litigated an array of racial justice issues, lots of discriminatory policing cases, some abusive immigration detention practices cases, pretty wide range of civil rights work. Then I was a staff attorney at the National Center for Law and Economic Justice, where I continued to litigate discriminatory policing. That was the first time I actually did disability litigation. I did a lot of Olmstead cases there, some discrimination in healthcare, and then I made my way into legal academia. how I got into legal academia was that I'm also a writer. That's another big part of my identity. I have a background in creative writing, spoken word. I've published poems and short stories from the time that I was a child, and I love to write. And I felt that in the civil rights space, I couldn't really find a place that fit what I wanted to do and all of who I was. I felt like in the quote unquote traditional civil rights racial justice space, I was always saying and people with disabilities. And then in the disability spaces, I felt like they weren't really doing the work that I wanted. And people started to say to me, well, you have a very unique vision for the work that you want to do, and you love to write, you want to write. Because I was very clear about the fact that I wanted to continue to write. And they were like, that sounds like academia to me. And I was like, does it? And that is how even the idea of academia was presented to me. And I think my pathway into academia is maybe not some of the pathways that people will talk about here. I never, to this day, I have never been on, quote unquote, on the market, which is sort of the way that a lot of people get into legal academia. I instead saw an opening at New York Law School, and I applied directly to New York Law School. I had been going there for a few years prior as a guest lecturer in a course. Because one of my supervising attorneys knew I was interested in a career in legal academia, he was like, "Hey, you want to teach? They invited me to teach this class, and I can't go. Do you want to do it?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay." And then I did that one time, and they kept inviting me back year after year. And so while I was a staff attorney at the National Center for Law and Economic Justice, I happened to see an opening at New York Law School, and I had been planning to transition into academia some kind of way. I thought about a fellowship, but I wasn't quite sure how I was going to make my way into legal academia until I saw that opening. And because I had a relationship with the school, I applied, I did my job talk, founded the clinic, and here I am. That felt long, but that was my journey.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Um, I appreciate that. I love your journey. I feel like for a lot of us, at least going into the legal profession, both starting in law school and going to your career, it's always shown as kind of a straight line. But
Hey, AJ, and can we pause for a second? It looks like the interpreter has paused or frozen. Is that the case for everybody? Okay, I can see her now. Thank you.
super sorry. I'll stop my rambling and go to Katie.
Thank you, AJ. So my name is Katie Eyer. I am a white woman with what my children tell me are oversized glasses, short, blondish hair, and a black shirt and a gray and black scarf. My pronouns are she, her. I am a professor of law at Rutgers Law School. Um, and my trajectory into legal academia actually also went through civil rights law. I went to law school knowing I wanted to work on LGBTQ rights, disability rights, or both. At the time, I did not actually personally identify as a person with a disability, even though I had a mental health disability since I was a kid. But what really motivated that at the time was having a sister with schizophrenia and a father with schizoaffective disorder was sort of what got me interested in disability work. And again, over time, I've come to realize I too have a disability, but it took me a while to get there. I had a public interest fellowship working. I launched like an LGBT employment rights project, which was then one of the sort of only projects working on LGBT employment rights in the country. I left my dysfunctional nonprofit after the fellowship, but continued to do that type of work at a private firm. I also picked up disability work there. So I was doing plaintiff side employment discrimination work for disabled folks. I also did some ERISA disability and health insurance work. And I had sort of thought that I might want to go into legal academia. And at about, 7 or 8 years out, I got told basically like, now's the time you need to do it if you're going to do it. One of the perverse things about legal academia is that, with the possible exception of clinical work, and maybe even there, they don't like you to have been out in practice for too long. Otherwise, they worry that you're sort of trying to retire from practice. I cobbled together, a fakakta, not real fellowship type position for myself. I went half-time at my job, got myself a title at Penn. I was not getting paid at Penn, but to find time to write a paper, and ultimately very happily wound up successfully going on the job market, which I know we're going to talk a lot more about later, and got the job at Rutgers, which is where I've been ever since. And I'll just say one last thing before I pass it back to AJ, which is really happy that those of you who are thinking about academia are here. We really need you in academia. So welcome, and delighted to have you on the call.
Thank you so much. Jamelia, you are next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamelia Morgan. I am a professor of law at Northwestern Pritzker School of Law, and my pronouns are she, her. So I'm wearing white rimmed glasses. I am a Black woman. I have my hair pulled back because it's 7:30. It's late in the day. I'm wearing a Bears hoodie, which brings me some shame, respectfully, to Bears fan. But I'm not from Chicago. I'm from Los Angeles, and that's a part of the story that I'm going to tell. Like Britney mentioned, like where I grew up really influenced the path that I took. I grew up outside of Los Angeles in LA County in the early 90s, and really witnessed firsthand the kind of police brutality that was exacted on Black and Brown communities by the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department and the LAPD. And the nation, in fact, witnessed the scope of the brutality in mainstream media. And so it probably wasn't surprising to anyone that I went to law school for the specific goal of reforming the criminal legal system. I've since evolved in my politics to really thinking about how racial and disability justice can be used as a tool to dismantle the criminal legal system. And in my research, I've been thinking through how we can engage with legal rules and doctrines to cut off pathways into criminalization for people with disabilities, and multiply marginalized groups. And so it's a kind of personal passion of mine, in particular, having an older brother with disabilities, and experiencing just sort of a dissolution of our relationship on account of his incarceration, and the pathways into one of California's roughest prisons, Pelican Bay. And so, like you, Katie, I too came to identify as a person with a disability later in life, as someone that has been living with endometriosis for my entire life and managing pain. The interesting thing is, my diagnosis came later in life. I was pretty much ignored, and like many women, just told, it's in your head and stop being dramatic. And it wasn't until 3 years ago, when I needed surgery, that it was clear to the physicians finally that there was something going on. And I'm 40. I just turned 40. So, it took a long time. So a lot of what motivates the work is that kind of personal experience. But, the research became me search in many ways. So, law school for me, I did criminal legal system work, working on behalf of incarcerated people through the Detention and Human Rights Clinic. My amazing clinical professor, Hope Metcalf, was the one that told me to look into disability rights claims and introduced me to the ADA and encouraged me to take my first disability law class in the fall of 2012. And that really opened up a pathway for advocacy. It led to me applying and then accepting a fellowship after graduation to work with the ACLU National Prison Project on some of the issues I'd been working on in law school, mainly accommodations and Eighth Amendment claims for incarcerated people with disabilities. It then led me to the Abolitionist Law Center when I decided that this reform work wasn't quite going to work for me, wasn't going to lead to the transformative change that I sought. And so I went there, and I was having a grand old time. It was 5 years in practice, and then again got the tap on the shoulder, literally in the form of an email from a professor that said, hey, there's this job at the University of Connecticut Law School. They're looking for someone to teach critical race theory. You should apply. And so I also didn't go on the market and just applied to one school and ended up getting an amazing job at UConn Law School. And that's where I started my career. So again, kind of accidental law professor. I know we say that a lot, but you can see from our stories, it's you know, there's truth to it. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Jamelia. Yes, I don't know if you would like to be Kat or Katherine this evening. I don't know which you prefer. I say Kat, but I don't know if you want others to say Katherine.
I'm amongst friends, so I'll go by Kat. Hi everyone,
Okay.
I'm Kat Macfarlane. I'm a white woman with shoulder length blonde hair. I'm wearing hoop earrings and black rim glasses and a black turtleneck. I teach at Syracuse University College of Law, where I also direct the disability law and policy program. As I look at the fellow speakers on the panel tonight, I realized that you helped me find community, and that your presence in my academic career has really helped shape it and make it what it is today. So I'm grateful to your community and friendship. Let's see. What can I say? I always wanted to be a lawyer, and then I realized I actually wanted to be a law professor. I've been a person with disabilities for as long as I can remember. I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis when I was 13 months old. I also have an eye disease called uveitis. So despite having tons of treatment and chronic pain and all the things that come along with autoimmune disease, I had a lot of internalized ableism, and I think I still do, and didn't identify as a person with disabilities in my everyday life until probably my early 30s when I started teaching. But in any event, there's going to be some similar themes in my story as well. I took a year off between college and law school, moved to LA, and worked at an amazing civil rights org called MALDEF. And then I worked at a great public interest org that sued slumlords and co-counseled with a Los Angeles civil rights firm called Hatzel and Stormer. For those of you who know kind of the LA or Southern California civil rights scene, Barbara Hatzel and Dan Stormer did a lot of the early sex harassment cases and Section 1983 prisoner civil rights cases. So I was really privileged in my early 20s to be working on some high impact cases. I went to Loyola Law School, and I thought I was going to be a public defender, and then I just kind of turned into someone a little bit basic and did a few federal clerkships, and then I went to work in big law for 3 years. And as a person with disabilities, I needed that private sector income. This is pre-Affordable Care Act, and even though I always had great healthcare, the financial stress of my healthcare bills were always and still kind of hang over my head. So that influenced that decision a little bit. But I had a life-changing experience, and I'm grateful to the firm I worked for because they bankrolled Section 1983 prisoner civil rights case. They let me take it all the way to trial my first year, and I liked that much more than my mortgage-backed securities litigation experience. And it just helped me realize that civil rights was where I wanted my career to be. I worked at Corp Counsel in New York City for a couple of years, and then I did a fellowship at LSU for 2 years in Baton Rouge. LSU let me teach a civil rights litigation course in addition to legal writing, and I pitched a 2-credit disability law seminar to them. And it was the first time they'd ever had that kind of class at LSU, my first time teaching it. And I was still, I think, kind of in a bit of a denial as to whether disability law was going to be a big part of my career. So I got a tenure track job at Idaho and was a CIPRO Section 1983 person until I realized that the knowledge that I by force had to accumulate in my personal life with respect to accommodations law and the ADA was something that I kind of needed to write about. So I wrote my first like formal law review article about disability law right in the first year of the pandemic. Several of you had to read many drafts and help me with it, and that took my life in an entirely new and amazing direction. I ended up working at the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights for a year, and then for the first time in my life, got recruited to the job I have now, where I get to teach con law and civil rights litigation and disability law, and run a program that was founded by Arlene Cantor, and focuses on our disability law curriculum and bringing amazing speakers like several of my co-panelists to campus. So I'll leave it at that. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. And again, it's nice to be on a panel with friends.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to take moderator's privilege and change the order a little bit because we kind of talked about this. So Marissa mentioned earlier that I'm an adjunct and everyone basically talked about their stories. Well, I really lucked into my job. Howard University School of Law didn't have a space law program. There aren't a ton of Black people who know space law or have a space law degree. And so the students were pushing for the class and I knew the students. And then they were like, we need a teacher. I was like, I can find one. And they were like, why don't you just teach it? And so I became an adjunct basically just because I existed as a Black person with a specialty area. And right now, still a niche area of law. So I want to use that to lead into the question about the process of becoming a law professor. It says in the question that it's quite involved. My story is not, but can you tell us a little bit about your specific process? I know we touched on this a little bit, but if anyone wants to add more about their story of becoming a professor or an associate professor or even a tenure track professor, because that's way different than an adjunct where like, I don't even know if I'll get my class next year, right? And for this one, we will go in reverse order and then I'll just switch the order. So Kat, you can go first this time.
Okay. So let's see. Because of where I went to law school, there's always been a ceiling in my career, and I think a bit of a different path to entry. So I went to an amazing law school, but I think I'm the only person who's gone into a tenure track job in like the last 4 years, which is to say there just isn't a built-in system to advance our alumni. So my law school has been amazing to me, but no one really knows or has known what to do with me, and I had to create my own networks. So I think I am where I am because there are a lot of other aspects of my resume that are really conventional, and I have a lot of racial privilege and class privilege as well that has helped me break through some of the other barriers. But there's definitely a ceiling with respect to where I'm able to publish and where I'm able to work because I don't have a degree from a top 10 or a top 20 law school. So that meant I had to do a fellowship. I had to have several pieces that were published when I went on the fellowship market. And so I think that the writing that I did even before I became a fellow, so that means after 9 p.m., working at my big law job, squeezing out an hour, hour and a half of law review research, doing it on the weekends, really pushing to have a publication record and make myself a more viable candidate. I was very lucky to go through a 2-year fellowship program. They prepped me really well at LSU Law. I feel like they turned me into someone that sort of could talk like a law professor. And then I went on the tenure track market the fall of my second year at LSU. And I've bopped around to different schools ever since. But the writing was key, and I had to be socialized into being able to talk like an academic would and to build a network in a bit of an unconventional way. And I think I still feel like I don't really sound right in certain academic circles. I still feel a bit like the odd person out, and a bit under networked. But the writing has always, I've tried to let it speak for itself. So conventional route, a little bit more difficult just because of the nature of my JD degree.
I think I'm next. So I just wanted to underline something that you said, Kat, like the writing of the job talk paper is an essential part of the application. But for many of us that come out of practice, you are writing and editing that paper while working or clerking. And so that can be challenging. And so if you have the sense that you want to apply at some point, it's, I don't think, ever too soon to start working on that paper. The job talk is a component of the application, and that's, it's an involved process because there's a lot asked of us. In addition to your job talk paper, which is a law review article that is supposed to be a kind of entree into who you'll be as a scholar. Mine wasn't. Mine was actually on voting rights because I actually didn't plan well, as I mentioned. And so I ended up using and editing my student note for my job talk paper, which is why it didn't quite fit the picture of the scholar that I wanted to be. But, we had to do what we had to do at the time. The other piece of it is the research agenda, where you outline, I think it's probably like the next 2 to 3 papers. And so that was also challenging for someone that hadn't thought about a research agenda. So, the other piece of the puzzle for me was, connecting up with mentors rather. So one part of the story that I didn't mention and I should have is before I went to law school, I worked for law professors. I worked at UCLA and Columbia for the African American Policy Forum, which was Kim Crenshaw's organization, where she was attempting and still is operationalizing critical race theory in the form of a nonprofit organization that did amazing racial justice policy and communications work. So here I am as, a 22-year-old working for, one of the greatest racial justice, CRT, feminist scholars of all time. And I did not know who she was, right? So I had this opportunity to learn from, in my mind, one of the greatest. And so when I expressed an interest in going to law school, naturally, Kim and Luke and folks like Devin Carbato and Cheryl Harris were, you should think about being a law professor. And again, not knowing what that entailed, started to think about it, right? So by the time I get the email out of the blue from my professor, I was sort of at least primed to what was the lifestyle going to be like and what kind of work would I be expected to do. So you need a lot of support. Like the research agenda, there's like a finesse to it, there's a frame to it. You have your CV, you have references, you need to have the right references in the sense of the references should show the scope of who you are as a scholar, and also, the politics of, as Kat mentioned, like the kind of elite law school game. You want to make sure that your professors have good reputation so they can vouch for you. So there's a lot to kind of keep in mind. It's kind of gross if you think about how elite this profession is, and specifically law teaching. But there are people and resources to help navigate that. And I was fortunate to be in a network, again, as I said, just because I had this amazing job before law school, of people that read my job talk paper, read and tried to piece together something that looked like a research agenda to help me get that first job. And so just wanting to kind of underline that it's a community effort to really get these jobs, I think, in light of all of the barriers that are put up.
I think I'm up next. One thing I'll add to what people have already said is that there are significant differences in the market depending on what type of position you're looking for. So AJ alluded to this, right? If you're looking to teach a class at a law school as an adjunct, that's actually often the easiest type of teaching to do. Often if they're looking to fill a gap and you have some expertise, they're very open to that. Even for full-time positions, there are differences between clinical positions and the market for them, and legal research and writing positions and the market for them, and what are often referred to as podium, meaning like doctrinal class professors. And most of what's been talked about so far is for podium professors. I'll let Britney talk about clinical professors because she is a clinical professor. I'll just add that there's more value, I think, on experience and expertise in skills professors. Often you're still expected to have a job talk, but it's a slightly different weighting of what is valued in the market. The other thing I'll say is it can feel like a very long, brutal process. Some folks on this call had one place they applied, they got the job. For me, that was like not the story. I applied for fellowships. Nobody wanted me. I thought about like maybe I'm not meant for this. Maybe this is not the right thing. If I can't even find a fellowship position. To be clear, I didn't apply nationwide. I had kids. I didn't want to move, so that was partly on me. But one of the things I've seen is that persistence. If you're somebody who really loves to write and is able to get things published, like it is important to publish, there are often pathways in. That's true even for people who can't necessarily, relocate everywhere in the country to get a job. As I've already alluded to, that was true for me. I feel like I'm rambling. One other thing I'll say is that there actually are a lot of resources out there that really go through the nuts and bolts of all of the stages of like, here's how you could get a VAP or a fellowship. Here's what your job talk should look like. Here's examples of research agendas. For example, I just looked just now, Yale Law School, which I was fortunate to graduate from, given that they do have a big machine for getting people on the market. A lot of their resources are publicly available. So a lot of the information that they provide to students, certainly not the like back channeling support, but a lot of the basic nuts and bolts are up there. And that can be really helpful when you're starting your process. So I'll go ahead and stop there and hand it over to Britney.
Yeah, I think I can echo a lot of what's been said. I'll talk about the process for clinicians, and I'll acknowledge that also may vary depending on the institution. But as a clinician, I did a job talk, and maybe we should talk a little bit about even what that even means and what that is. It's basically a day-long process. It's a series of interviews with different faculty members, students. It could be staff, where you're talking about your vision or your style as a law professor, and then you do a big talk for everyone at the end of that. That is your job talk presentation, and you answer questions, kind of like moot court if there are students that want to visualize it in that way, I guess. And then there's often a dinner component as well. So it's a day-long process, the job talk process. So I did that process, but because I was going to be a clinician, I wasn't required to have a job talk paper. And so for your doctrinal professors, the job talk paper is usually what you're answering questions about in your larger presentation and even in some of your smaller presentations. I did have a job talk essay though, because I'm weird. I'm a clinician who wants to write. I said earlier that a big part of why I moved into academia was because I wanted to write. So I did have an essay, and I kind of framed my job talk around that essay, but for clinicians, it's much more of a business pitch, if you will, because you have to explain this law firm that you're going to build, the type of work that you're going to do, how you're going to get the clients, how you're going to get the students involved, what skills they're going to get, how you're going to convey those skills. So it's basically giving a business pitch of how you're going to build this business, run this business, teach the skills required to facilitate the business, all in one. And I had a lot of help and support in sort of figuring out the apparatus of how that was gonna look. I had the vision, but I had the people around me to help me sort of figure out how to present the vision, the most effective way to present that vision. And I will echo the privilege that a lot of people here have talked about. I got my law degree from the University of Pennsylvania. Now Penn Carey Law, still Penn Law life to me, but I will say this, Penn has an apparatus for getting people into academia. I do think often in law school, we don't acknowledge that certain people are targeted for that apparatus. I was not one of those people. So let me say that first. But what I did have was people, individuals, if not the institution, individuals who supported and saw something in me. And when I said to those people, I'm going to, try to be a law professor, those people rallied around me. And so they helped me, practice my presentation and get everything together. And also because I had come from the civil rights world, a lot of civil rights attorneys tend to have some sort of foot in the academic world. I mentioned that my previous supervising attorney was the one who pulled my coattail about New York Law School and said, "Hey, you want to go teach this class since I can't do it?" So I had people who I had worked with who had been clinicians or who had taught in some capacity. And so the combination of those people plus my former law professors getting behind me and saying, "Okay, you have the vision, let's help give you the presentation and the technique," was what helped me figure out how to get my foot in the door of the academic world.
Thank y'all so much. I'm supposed to save time at the end for questions, so I want to combine a couple questions. I also want to note that academic privilege is so cool. I went to a school that's dropped like 20 places since I graduated, which is not that long. And, my degree is just depreciating by the day. One of the questions that we have you experienced or encountered ableism at your university? I'm going to answer yes for everyone, because that is just what academia is. But if you want to tell us about that experience, it would be great. And the other questions I want to combine are, how has your disability influenced the work that you do? And what are some of the barriers you've found for entering legal academia for disabled folks? And we can start with Jamelia.
All right, I was just taking notes because there was a lot. There was like a three-parter. Okay.
I'm gonna put it in the chat. Don't worry.
Okay. All right. So I, how do I say that? I think someone already listed internalized ableism, and I think for me it was that in a kind of combination of like the super crip. Like there would be times when I'd be in like excruciating pain, like smiling in front of my colleagues' faces, and that kind of the politics of respectability and like what it meant to be a Black woman with disabilities in law teaching kind of shaped how I was showing up. And what was so interesting, it's like I had this new job. I was leaving UC Irvine Law School and coming to Northwestern, and I was like ready to go. And my body completely crashed. Like everything came to a head. And so I was supposed to be starting, let's say it was like the fall of 2022, I think, if I'm getting the years right. And I had to take a medical leave. Like it was that serious. And so I didn't really get to um, sort of navigate the intricacies of working with what was, I then found out, endometriosis and chronic pain management. I think for anyone that's like taking pain meds, like you can't really take the pain meds and go teach or go lecture, or for my case, I can't even really have a conversation because they make me ill. And scramble my brain in unhelpful ways. And so what's been interesting though is that, since then I've been working with students to think, not only students that deal with chronic pain, but students with disabilities that are navigating the institution. And I, to your point, AJ, I don't think any school is getting this right. Like to Kat's work, the amount of documentation that you need to just establish basic accommodations is onerous. I've had colleagues say very ableist and just counterproductive things about the number of students with disabilities that we have at our school, which is really harmful. And in a lot of ways, like the Center for Racial and Reproductive Center for Racial and Disability Justice. Sorry, it's so late. I'm not able to keep track of things. The center that I run, we've really focused in on how to support students in the claiming of accommodations and pushing back against the stigma. Because I think if you think about not only law school, but the legal profession, there's this like super able-bodied view of the attorney that can work all hours of night, that doesn't even take bathroom breaks half the time, that doesn't even need to eat. And like, it just was so counter to how I functioned as just a person. It's one of the reasons why I knew kind of in the back of my mind that I wasn't going to be a litigator for that long. Like, I just couldn't be that person. And so, when I talk about barriers, it's not just the attitudes and the lack of an infrastructure around providing timely accommodations for our students and certainly professors that claim accommodation, but it's the kind of attitudinal barriers, and it's the structure of how we conceive of the like legal attorney role, if you will. And I'm curious if others think the same. I just think that it's so intrinsic to how we do business. And it really it trickles down to our students and their experiences. And so I would say, for me, it's been about sharing my story. I mean, again, as Kat said earlier, it's so great to be on a panel with folks that I read, but I wanted to shout out Katie Eyer, your work on claiming disability. I think it's so important to claim it with our students so they know that there are folks with disabilities in this work and they see how we manage. For me, I think that's been a big part of my like political consciousness just over the last 3 years, right? Since my endometriosis diagnosis and since really leaning into so much of what Katie has encouraged us to do, particularly as law faculty. Thanks.
Thank you. Katie, if you want to respond to that.
Sure. Well, it's, such a mutual admiration. Jamelia's work means so much to me as well, and Kat's and other folks on this call. Ableism. So a particular story popped into my head. The closest. So I'll first echo what Jamelia had to say. Law schools have a long way to go, and a lot of it really is about the culture of the profession, which is so ingrained, this idea that a lawyer and thus a law professor and a law student is somebody who has to be able to give 110%, not 40 hours a week, but 60 hours a week or 70 hours a week or whatever, whatever the ridiculous number is. I have had times that I probably should have asked for accommodations, but I've not asked for accommodations in my career as a law professor. And the anecdote that popped in my head was the closest I ever came. I struggle particularly with my mental health in certain types of service positions that involve mediating conflict. I'm somebody for whom conflict really generates very serious exacerbation of my mental health. And I sort of tried to broach this subject with our associate dean, and it was very casually brushed off as like, nobody likes doing these jobs, and I never said anything again, which again, probably wasn't the right thing to do, but is, I think, indicative of it's often hard to know if pushing those things is going to be worth the detriment that it might create. Or the effort it might take to again, some of Kat's work. I see, and again, much of where I see ableism in my law school most graphically is with respect to our students. Although I will say our leadership over the last 5 some years has been really terrific around this. And I really do think it has helped to shift the culture of the law school. So we are not by any sense a model, but I don't hear the same types of sort of treating accommodations almost as if they're cheating type of comments made by professors. What are some of the barriers to entry? I'll talk a little bit about that. This is actually something that Kat and I and some others have been trying to work on. For a long time, there was a law professors conference I kid you not, referred to as the meat market, that was very disability unfriendly. It basically required you to be able to literally run around this crazy hotel all day long through hallways that were not accessible to people with mobility impairments. That thankfully with COVID went by the wayside. There was talk of reviving it, but the institution that organized it did seem receptive to the idea that if they're going to do that, that perhaps they shouldn't do that because of the disability concerns. I'll put it that way, or do it in a virtual space, type of virtual conference. And then I think the other barriers to entry are in some ways similar to those that might exist anywhere in the legal profession, which are that it continues to be, a profession that has a culture of sort of not accommodating, people's bodies and minds and the limits of their bodies and minds, and not valuing people for what they can bring for, to part of what the institution wants out of them, as opposed to, sort of all of the demands that the institution has traditionally demanded. I think the one thing that may be a little bit different, I'm guessing Kat may talk about this about academia, is you have this very long performative uh, job interview process during which it can be difficult to know whether or not to ask for the accommodations you need. Best practices are they should ask you if you need anything, but many institutions don't. And I'll go ahead and stop there.
Thank you. I want to allow Britney or Kat to answer and be mindful of saving time for audience questions.
I mean, I guess I'll say I want to like zoom back out a little bit and say I'm not sure the average person knows what law professors even do. So I think if I enumerated that a little bit more, that would answer a lot of questions about ableism. Like, and it varies, of course. We're all on different tracks. Like some of us are doctrinal clinicians, different things. But like in general, I think students, you see you see your professors in class, and you think party done, right? No. So we teach. Us clinicians have cases. Those cases don't go away, right? So that means all year long, I'm litigating cases. I litigated complex federal cases as a lawyer. I litigate complex federal cases as a teacher with students, right? So cases, classes. Your law professors are required to perform something called service. So unlike regular jobs where governance isn't really a regular part of many lawyers' jobs. As a faculty member, you are part of the functioning of the institution. So a lot of us serve on committees. We help make decisions for the institution. There are places we have to be, things we have to do. We have to serve the institution. We have to serve the legal profession, right? Things like being on panels and being part of boards and other things in the legal society and realm. We do scholarship, right? So we write things, we publish things that may or may not be required depending on the track that you are, but most professors and scholars publish. So I've named about 4 things already: teaching, litigation, or some sort of legal work if you're a clinician. There's service to your institution, service to the profession. I feel like I'm still leaving something out. Scholarship. And then I also direct a clinic, right? So I'm not just teaching it and litigating the cases. I'm responsible for the day-to-day management of it. For me, that means like managing a grant. It means, how do students get in the clinic? How do students find out about the clinic? I'm running a business. That is 6 different jobs. So, and a big part of how you're evaluated in academia is by how, quote, productive you are. So when you ask me questions about ableism, those 2 things are inherent, right? Because if your value is being judged on how much you produce and how much you can do and how well you do that, that is inherently going to conflict with notions of ableism. So yes, do I navigate ableism? I also want to mention racism, ageism, classism, all the isms together. Yes. So yeah, I think that's my short answer to ableism in the legal space and legal academia.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Kat, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I'll touch upon, I'll try and bring up some different points. So there's a lot of pressure when you're entering academia to be open. I think Katie has mentioned this. The more open you are to moving anywhere, the more opportunities, more jobs there are. And that's just not a possibility for people with complex healthcare needs, or really for people with disabilities in general. We have narrowed options. So that, having to move to I moved to Moscow, Idaho for my first tenure track job, and the only rheumatologist was an hour and a half away, which posed accommodations issues because I couldn't get documentation and an appointment, and my vision was acting up, so I couldn't drive to the appointment. But I now know a rural community just doesn't work for my disabilities and my health issues. That also makes visiting really difficult, and a lot of the way to be successful and ambitious in academia is to be able to travel a lot, to be able to visit, to be able to move to a different institution. And reestablishing healthcare is really difficult. The way you have to start your deductible again in August or September if you start a new job is really difficult if you have chronic health issues. I had to turn down a visitorship because of issues surrounding my home institution's unwillingness to work with me about the restart date for my health insurance. It would have potentially had to make me pay 2 deductibles in the January that I wanted to return, and there was just no one cared. Shout out University of Idaho. This is another University of Idaho example just to really illustrate what accommodations look like. So I think I always experience conflict surrounding my disability when I have to ask for accommodations. And so an accommodation I asked for in Idaho was to not teach on Fridays because I get infusions every 8 weeks. And I wanted to be able to not have to cancel class or not have to come and teach after a 3-hour chemo infusion. And that request was originally denied. And the problem I finally figured out was that my first spring of my tenure track career, I was teaching 7 credits of 1L classes. So I taught a 4-credit con law and a 3-credit civ pro, which is way too much for any first year professor. So that was the actual problem. And it created a scheduling difficulty at a small school with 1L section. It wasn't actually me, but I eventually was able to get that Friday off. But the associate dean came into my office and told me that he was going to capitulate to my demands surrounding my personal needs and give me the Friday off. So it's rough out there, man. And just recently, I was elected to my university's university senate. I went to the first meeting, and all of the seating required 1 or 2 steps up. The stage where speakers spoke had no ramp. And so after 6 months of working with the leaders of that enterprise, I finally got that meeting moved, but it wasn't pleasant. And the problem is you have to do all of this right when you're new to a job. And so you're immediately a person who is a problem when you're just trying to forge relationships. So I sorry if this is so much of a downer. Things are much better where I'm at right now, but it's been really, really difficult for accommodations that I can say as a matter of law should not have posed any problems. I have to sit when I lecture. If the special chair that the school bought for me ever shows up on a regular basis on the first day of class, I'll faint out of delight. It like disappears into the ether. So, and then I write about this, right? The fact that you get accommodations and then have to expend time and money on enforcing them. So it can be a little heavy, I think, and I suspect others agree with me, to like be so enmeshed in disability law and then and also to live it on a daily basis. So I'm still working through all of this stuff. I'm very privileged to be tenured and up for to promotion to full prof right now, which gives me more job security. But I still haven't gotten all the accommodations I need.
Thank you so much. So we have 29 minutes left by my clock, which means I have time to ask one more question before we open it up to the audience. And that means that Katie gets to go first because she's the only one who has not got to go first in a round of questions yet. So we are doing great. I want to give myself a high five for moderating in such a way that everything has worked out smoothly. And the last question that we have from me is, what advice do you have for disabled legal professionals looking to become law professors?
Great question. So I'm going to give what was the best piece of advice I think I got, which is as you start to think about this process and as you continue through it, don't be afraid to reach out to people. And that, I'll say like probably, 5 out of every 8 people I reached out to were happy to speak with me, were generous in their time, were supportive. And that both helps you figure out how to get from here to there. It also serves another important purpose, which goes to something Jamelia was talking about earlier, which is like you're going to eventually need recommenders. And one way you can help to build that base is starting now, right? Like if you think you might want to go on the job market in a couple years, or you might want to apply for a fellowship in a couple years, start talking to people in the academy. Reach out to people whose work is consistent with what you want to do, or a mentor you had in law school. And you don't need to feel like you have to have had all those relationships already built. There's a lot of people who really are happy to provide mentoring. I'll count myself among them. I'm always happy to talk to people who are going on the job market.
Thank you. We'll go with Brittany.
I think I'd say very similar to Katie. I think I would just say ask everything. Because that's something that's not intrinsic to me. I'll figure it out because that's been my life. And you don't have to do that. And I think even if you don't know what to ask, that's a question in and of itself. Ask what you should be asking. Because I think the more information you go into this process with, and the more you can plan, the better you'll be able to navigate it.
Thank you. Kat?
So advice I give to folks is to, if you have a vision of the career you want, see if you can find people that maybe came from a similar law school to yours or took a similar trajectory. Try and reach out to those people and pick their brains about what it took. I think we've all spoken to the need to be engaged writers. I realized I wanted to add something that my law school did for me. Or I affirmatively asked, and then they kindly gave this to me. You need a free Lexis or Westlaw password to do all this research, and if you don't have an affiliation with a law school, and you can't use whatever you use for work. So ask your associate dean for faculty affairs or research of the school that you went to give you access, and they should be able to. And that just is one of those practical things that makes it easier to start writing well before you hit the market.
Thank you. And Jamelia?
The only thing I'd add is, we described, I think Brittany did a really great job describing like the different types of work that law professors do. And, you might be better at some parts of the job than others. I would just say, don't let that deter you from the entire position. There's a lot of, I was going to say freedom, less freedom in these moments, but there's a lot of freedom and flexibility was going to be the line within this field to really speak truth to power. to write about your own experiences, to make it relevant to law, to develop legal theories, to push courts, to push legislators, to, give voice, amplify the voice of voices of the communities that you come from. And I just think that's really empowering. And I think it makes our job really wonderful. And, whether it's the writing, the teaching, running a clinic, doing academic service, it'll get done. And I think it'll get done in community. It will not get done on your own, right? It'll be a very stressful experience if you try to do all of this work on your own. And so just to really emphasize community, as in the community that we're building here, to echo the offers of support that Katie shared, we're happy to pay it forward, because so much of why we're all here is because people did that for us. And it's a part of, I think, the ethos. We have a really great disability law sub-community. There's so many different fields of law, but I love ours in particular. And we really cultivate community in that space. So reach out and, spread the word to others that you think might be thinking about this. There's a place for you here.
Thank y'all so much. I really like the idea of reaching out to folks. I know that for me personally, I'll cold email almost anyone. I know that may seem uncouth, but before I started my legal career, I did sales, so it's easy for me. But I also think it's so important to just shatter the gatekeeping and snobbiness of the ivory tower, because a lot of people in our profession feel like they're so important and they're not. And like, we should just get rid of that entire ethos of like, I'm some mythical law savant because I'm a professor, when again, there are people like me who like literally just lucked into a job. Like, I'm no better than my students in a lot of
First of all,
areas.
AJ, you do space law. We're gonna need you to stop talking about yourself like this.
Well, I was going to say, for most areas of law, I'm probably worse than my students. I just happen to know space law and I teach space law. Anyway, we have 22 minutes for questions, so hopefully we have more than one, but then we also have to save time for back end admin stuff. So I will be mindful of that. If the audience has anything, you can send me a message if you don't want to speak out, or you can raise a hand and be called on. Hammer on, not necessary. Oh man,
Alexia has a question.
Yes, thank you for saying the name, because I always struggle, and I've said this name like 4 times in my life. Yes.
Should I go ahead? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Thank you all so much. This was really wonderful, and I know I've spoken to a couple of you personally. My question is, Jamelia, you spoke really beautifully, and others have chimed in about this topic too, just about like kind of like this notion of like how we think about a lawyer itself, and like how ableist that idea is, the kind of like workhorse, grind till you die. I've taught before as visiting faculty in a clinic, and I'm just curious how, if you have any practical tips about how do we disrupt that as disabled law professors in our classrooms? Like, how do we, practically speaking, kind of challenge those notions, and how do we embody that in how we conduct like our classes and our work inside of these institutions? I was curious if anyone had any advice about that.
I think it's such a powerful question. I'll just share a couple of my tips. It's nothing too radical, but I have been like inspired by like the little quiet acts of resistance that are happening not only in this moment but beyond. For me, I mean, Kat talked about this. Sometimes I sit down when I'm lecturing, and if there's a problem with it, I guess I'll see it in the evaluations, but I'm tired, or it's too hot in this room. Or sometimes I will, let students know that I can't meet them at this hour because I have a therapy session. I signal that I have access needs that need to be met as well. And with, colleagues, sometimes it's saying no, like, we're not going to have this meeting at 9 p.m. at night. Like, I need to be winding down. And I think that it's not just individual focus, it's community focus. So if there are, we're on, committee projects, and there's a lot of work being put on students in a particularly busy time of the year. It's like standing up and saying, okay, is this deadline really that urgent? Especially in the academy. I mean, I only have tactics for this because it's really hard to do that quiet resistance work in the actual practice of law. But some of the demands that we put on our students, I have students that are amazing and apologizing for getting sick. And it's like, well, what professors told you that you can't take a couple days off for this lecture that I'm about to record, to come to take the time rather to heal. And so I don't know, it just seems minor, but I just feel like we need to stop with the super crit mentality and just give people space, right? Maybe, Katie, to your earlier example, okay, no, I don't want to be in this conflict-ridden space right now. I'm going to take a break, or I'm going to leave the meeting early. Like, lawyers we're so normative. Like other fields, I feel like they'd be like, this isn't working for me, and they're out, For us, we stick and bear it. Like, we're hungry, we have needs, like, we try to grind it out. So I don't know, that's just how I think about it, but I think it's such an important question.
I totally agree with everything that Jamelia had to say. And I just wanted to add like some other thoughts. It's one of the things I try to keep in mind in my own relationships with my students. Obviously, those are bounded by a structure that limits my ability to like create the inclusive utopia I would like to. But things like, I need to stuff an extra day of doctrine in, or maybe I should give students a mental health day midway through the semester. I've become much, much more flexible around deadlines. I know all the arguments about out in practice, right? You need to be able to meet deadlines, and I do expect students to communicate with me, but I also feel like, being part of being inclusive is recognizing that not everybody is able to produce full bore performance all of the time. And then I would say, I would echo, like, as you move up in this career, you have more opportunity to, once you're tenured, things like that, to exercise your privilege to say no and set boundaries and to be explicit about why, right? And I think that those little things, they aren't going to transform things overnight, but they hopefully can help shift culture over time.
So I want to mention that there are always people on a law school faculty that look really well rested, and they're generally white men. And so the more senior I get, if a student group asks me to be an advisor for a faculty group, I ask them to find a male co-advisor to even things out. The gender and racial dynamics on law school faculty really put incredibly unreasonable burdens on women and women of color in particular. And along those lines, I say this to my junior mentees all the time: you are not a party planner. You should not engage in anything or be raising your hand to party plan. No one cares when you're up for review. It's not consequence free always to say no, but it adds absolutely nothing to your portfolio to be good at party planning. So women of the world, please join me in being bad at party planning. And then I try and do things that I don't always follow through on. Like, I try and be mindful about when I'm answering emails. And I don't like having endless office hours. I think like an open door policy actually for me is really disruptive of how I work. So I use Calendly. We stick to appointments. And in theory, when those appointment slots are filled up, there's always next week. No one is going to die if we don't answer a Commerce Clause question on Thursday evening at 10 p.m. I'm trying. I don't always live up to these, but I realize when I'm working around the clock, I'm just sending a really bad message that that's what I think is a healthy way to work. So I've incorporated like some breathing exercises here and there into my big 1L classes, and check in with them and have them do like mindfulness exercises about things they're proud of that have nothing to do with law school a couple times throughout the semester, and they write it down and they come back to it. So I could stand to do that myself more in my own life, but students have shown me an incredible amount of grace. They especially did at the height of the pandemic, and it's only made me more aware of the ways that I can do that for them too. So in that in that way, teaching is really a revelation and incredibly rewarding.
I think for me, I would say authenticity and boundaries. Um, I'm very transparent with my students. Like there's every day I have a different student be a scribe. So I obviously sit in class and I have someone write for me on the board when I want someone to do that. Like when I want someone to write. So I bring them into like, if necessary, this is how I'm feeling today, or this is what I'm gonna need help with. And we do that with one another, right? So I'm vulnerable with them, they're vulnerable with me. We communicate with one another about what our limitations might be or what we might need to accomplish the task at hand, which I think is also true to practice, right? I talk to them about what it is to work in a team and things like that. um, I also boundaries, and I'm a junior person with no kind of protections, or and I'm also just a rebel. Like I'm a civil rights attorney for real, like still right now, and that's in my genes and my DNA. So I have no problem telling you no, and not worrying about the consequences. So I keep that energy, and I've had that conversation with lots of people on this call who might have been like, I'm like, I'm good, I'm good. I just, I know I'm covered, and whatever happens will happen. And I think that that's important. I do work all the time, because I have court imposed deadlines, so it makes it a little bit different. But I'm very strategic about like, I know I have to say no to this party you want me to plan because I have this court thing that I have to do, and I need to be able to rest in between here. So no, right? So it's authenticity, but also being firm about my boundaries as well.
This was, oh, I love all of these answers. Thank you so, so much. Tremendously helpful to all of you.
Yeah, I loved all the answers too. And I will say, as an adjunct, I have no protection, but I also have a lot of freedom because the university gives two shits about my class. So I can open it up and be as accessible as possible in terms of deadlines, in terms of assignments, in terms of how I grade. For the most part, I still have to stick to the curve, but I have a lot of leeway in my rubrics. I think the thing about having boundaries is so important. And I also think, and I've gotten this feedback, giving law students an opportunity to not feel like law students and to feel like whole people in your classroom is so empowering for them. Like, yeah, they don't really care about space law, and students take it because they know that, like, I'm chill. But it's really helpful for them in their personal growth to understand that they don't always have to be a super competitive law student all the time who hates their classmates, is competing for a grade. And I think that's so important. And for me, I know lots of folks talked about like setting boundaries or when you're accessible. Like for me, I want to teach them accessibility as a person and a concept. So I go out of my way to say, like, you can contact me in multiple ways. I may take a while to get back to you because I have things to do. But if this is the best way for you to get a hold of me, I will make sure that I can communicate with you in that way. And I don't know, my students feel empowered. I'll stop talking because Matt has a hand.
Guys, sorry, I'm trying to get all the buttons pressed. I had a question about, so for those of us who haven't been in the legal world long, I've only been licensed for a couple of years, and but this is kind of a second career thing for me. I'm wondering what you all think the value of an LLM is in terms of in lieu of legal work practice experience, in terms of kind of areas of law that you might want to be interested in teaching.
I think it's only valuable in tax, and only one or two of them will help you get an academic job. Sorry if that sounds really cynical, but writing, getting stuff published will get you further than a lot of LLM degrees. As an intellectual experience, I think it's amazing. I don't think it is a way to get yourself into the academy.
This is AJ. Unless it's space law, it's super helpful to have an LLM because not a ton of people have a specialized degree in space law. I think to Kat's point, if your LLM is super specialized, it may be helpful in pitching yourself for a class. But generally speaking, I would agree. Also, you should always have an employer pay for your LLM if that is an option to you. If you want to talk about space law LLMs, let me know. Yeah.
Will do.
Looks like Eleanor has a hand.
Yes, thank you so much, Marissa. And thanks to all of you so much for this amazing panel. I'm just like so blown away by your credentials, and I had no idea that we have this kind of community of professors with disability at our law school. So I'm just blown away by this. This has been an amazing experience. I'm gonna enter into a faculty position this summer. So it's just been really exciting to hear from you all. So my question is, do you find your position as law professors with disabilities creates opportunities to mentor students with disabilities who might be struggling with navigating issues related to their disabilities in the practice of law or in law school?
I would say 100% yes. That's actually been one of the things that has been most important to me about coming to self-identify as a person with a disability is, I mean, I was always interested in mentoring and always did have some mentoring relationships with students with disabilities, but I now announce my mental health disability on the first day of class in all of my classes. And that has meant that I have dramatically more students who are self-disclosing to me and reaching out about these issues. I'll also say, yay, that's very exciting that you're joining legal academia. And I'll give a pitch we have AALS, we have a section for law professors with disabilities. I like to say we are small but mighty, wonderful group of people. Hope you will join and to see you at a future conference.
I will definitely join that. Thank you. I didn't know that existed.
Yeah, I would just totally echo what Katie says again, like walking in the footsteps that I still remember. I think it was another virtual conference, maybe the Penn Law one, when you encouraged us all to claim our disabilities. And since doing that, it's interesting. It's opened up an opportunity to activate around broader systemic issues at the law school. So I'm like plugged into what the students are doing around accommodations and accessibility and grading and assessments and able to support. So it's kind of changed the nature of the mentorship. But I think to maybe my kind of core values, I think if you're at these institutions, you have to try to make them better. It's just the little pockets of time you can find to make it less ableist, we should do it if we can. And so I've been able to kind of activate that part of it. So, teaching disability law, I would imagine you're going to be on like the accessibility working committee. That will be an opportunity, or you'll have the chance to not only teach the classes, but maybe to think about their policies. So sometimes just what you're teaching will invite these opportunities to engage in service, and the students are pretty core to that. So I also advise like the NDLPA chapter, which we call Disabled Law Students Association, and they've even looped me into the alumni group because the alumni were like, wait a minute, we want that group. And so the alumni of Northwestern with disabilities is now a group that we've done a couple programs with in collaboration with the center. So I see those as wins. Like I think that's a part of building community that doesn't feel like an obligation. It feels like an opportunity to do something. So I enjoy that.
I just say same all the time.
Yeah, same. Unfortunately, it can become overwhelming, right? And so I often get treated as someone who has a hand in accommodations, even though, of course, I'm not an admin. So I don't, and I'm like the university one-stop shop for all disability legal trauma, which is again not my role, unless I guess I want to turn into class action. I just say this. Sorry for the doomsday joking. You don't have to always do that, right? Like you can. Some of setting boundaries is I can do this in my work. I can do it in my teaching, and maybe I can't always do it as part of my service, and that can be hard to communicate to colleagues who want to refer kind of anything under the sun that relates to disability to the disabled person. And so I've tried in recent years to like offer training and like, this is how you can support your disabled students and your disabled colleagues, which Syracuse, to its credit, has really let me do. So I think it's wonderful. It's been a gift. I don't want to downplay what a rewarding experience it is to work with disabled students, but it's also okay to take a break from that, and definitely to ask your non-disabled colleagues to get up to speed and to be competent in things that they can learn just as well as we can.
I just wanted to add a short thing on that. Kat is both blessed and perhaps cursed to be nationally known as a resource on these issues. So I think she not only bears the weight of her own students, but people from across the country, sort of instead of educating themselves, sending them along to her. And I think the point is very well taken that we need to find ways to educate colleagues so that they can do this work also themselves.
Thank y'all so much. And thank you for being so amazing. Y'all's experience is so much different than mine. My students do not give two shits about me and my expertise, but random people will find me on the internet, or random students will like have no idea that I teach. So that is so interesting. Marissa's on the screen, and I got a message that there's no more questions. So I will stop talking and let Marissa close us out. Thank y'all so much. I truly appreciate all of you. You're all amazing. You all have like changed my life personally and professionally, whether you know it or not. So thank you all for all the work that you do. And I'll shout out Marissa so you can say things.
This is Marissa. First of all, people do care about you and your expertise. So just saying. I am so blessed to call many of you mentors and some friends. And so I am so grateful that you've chosen to spend your evenings with us. And thank you to those who've joined us this evening as well. This is just one of the many events that we host as a part of our work at the National Disabled Legal Professionals Association. So if you enjoyed this, I hope you consider joining. You can visit us at ndlpa.org/join, and I will put that in the chat. And if you are interested in volunteering or joining our mentorship program or anything else, I hope that you consider reaching out to us as well. You can either email us at info@ndlpa.org, which I also have put in the chat, or you can reach out to me directly. But thank you so much again. We support all of you. We're here to help. If you have any questions for us, please feel free to reach out. And obviously, to our amazing panelists, we will support you all no matter what. And we're so grateful to have you in our community. Thank you all, and I hope you have a great night. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
Thanks.